Hey there, Instagram. This is Ivani from Witchcraft Heirlooms. Sorry, I'm having some crazy technological difficulties today between Instagram and my phone, being really frustrating and not terribly cooperative. So hopefully this time it works. I had one person that was in before who got kicked out. Hopefully she finds us here again. But today, oh good, I'm glad you found me out. I'm having the craziest technological issues between Instagram and my phone today, and it's just the worst. So I'm grateful that you found me again. Again, if you're here watching #live, #replay, I'm going to open up my second window now that I finally got, I hope, Instagram figured out, just so I can see any comments that people post for me on Facebook, like those #live, so I can say hi. Because, as a quick reminder, oh, you're here on Facebook too. Excellent. In case you've not been here before, this is not the Ivani Show. This is supposed to be a conversation. So if you ever have anything you want to say, questions, comments, insults, I don't care, whatever, throw it out there. We want to hear from you. And again, I'm just even my phone is working, and now my tablet's being slow. So, oh my gosh, some Zen breathing for today. Like I said, I've had the worst technological luck today. I guess maybe I might not be able to see your comments if you're on Facebook, because it doesn't want to let me. Hopefully it shows up here, but if not, if I don't see I will try. I'm going to keep trying, because if you guys are trying to shop the live sale later than you, I won't be able to see you, and that would be really sad, if someone tries to claim something and then they can't because technology. So, So anyway, yeah, so again, going to be here talking about Journey Through, it's 20th Century Witchcraft, yay! Journey Through the 1940s, which is what this look is all about if you're just joining. Alright, I'm going to try to scroll, Facebook. Will you let me scroll? Oh, yay! It's letting me scroll, so that's a good sign. So let's click on crazy technological difficulties today between Instagram and my phone, being really frustrating. Alright. And not terribly cooperative. It's playing, so but it's not giving me the option to turn it down. Person that was in before who got kicked out. Hopefully she finds us here again. And I want that off. Okay. Alright. Hey, finally. Alright. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm finally ready to go. Let's make this happen. So, in our pre-show, I know I started a little bit late. I'm having crazy technological issues. Now my Facebook is freezing up. As long as Instagram is working, I'm going to be happy about it today. I can always cross-post this later if I have to. So the first thing I want to talk about today in our kind of pre-show, while we wait for other folks to show up, is, so the biggest thing that kind of happened in the 1940s to talk about is World War II. Really big deal. And there was a really infamous group in the 1940s called the Night Witches that I thought would be really interesting for us to talk about because, well, they have the word witch in their title. However, somewhat unfortunately, they were actually on the German side, not the U.S. side of the war. So this was a German air squadron that ran from 1942 to 1945. And it was actually completely women. So one of the only ones of that variety. It was a really big deal back then for them to have a female air squadron. And at one point they had up to 42-person crews, which at that time was really significant. And they generally flew U-2 planes, which were actually planes that were made for training or crop dusting. So the reason being that because it was an all-female squadron, they originally didn't really have a whole lot of faith in the group that they would, be able to do much of anything at all. So they kind of gave them a lot of second-rate, second-hand, pre-owned, pre-used, worn-out things between their clothing, their boots, and of course their equipment. In fact, there was a lot of equipment that they actually didn't give them at all, because they're like, they're just women, what are they going to be able to do? They wouldn't give them the good, navigational equipment. They'd give them, a compass or, sundials, or I can't remember the specifics, but it was really ridiculous. But this particular group, the Night Witches, they used a tactic called precision bombing. And they were actually one of the most decorated female units in the Soviet Air Force in general. And many pilots had flown over 800 missions. By the end of the war, and 23 had been awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union title. And 32 of its members actually died in the war. I know, not too many people here are probably going to cry too much about that, because again, they were on the German side. But still, it's kind of interesting because they were a fully female unit. It was a really big deal, historically speaking. And there was one member in particular by the name of, and again, I'm probably going to butcher this because I'm not Russian by any stretch that I'm aware of. Well, actually, I am Finnish. I guess geologically it's kind of close, but I digress. I think it's Nadezhda Popova. Again, might have messed that up pretty bad. But anyway, she flew 18 bombings in a single night. And there was actually an animated short film created about her back in 2013, so she was kind of a big deal. So that's the Night Witches. I probably could have stretched that out and made it go longer, but I feel bad that we were dealing so much with all those tech issues in the beginning. So let's go down to it. We're going to talk about 20th century witchcraft, journey through the 1940s. Glad that you can make it. So, like I said, the biggest thing that happened in the 1940s was World War II. At the time, World War II started in 1939 and it actually ended in 1945. So it did technically start before the 1940s. People really associate it very much with the 40s because most of it happened in that decade. And at that point, that was when the draft was put into effect. And basically hey Michelle, we're here talking about Journey Through the 1940s. That's why we have this very fancy outfit and hair happening today. So basically all of the menfolk of age and ability were drafted into the war. And because I Look Beautiful, I love this era. Yeah, it's a great era. That's kind of why part of why I'm really enjoying this series is that I love an opportunity to dress up and do period makeup or clothing or whatever. And actually this dress here, interesting, this is a Witch Bitch Thrift Mystery Bundle piece that I'm finally kind of wearing because it kind of went with the whole look. So hopefully they get to see some of this at some point and they'll recognize it. Hard to recognize because of the black and white, but I don't know, they're smart ladies. I think they'll figure it out. Anyway, where was I? Oh, because all of the men were drafted into the war, women were actually told at this point in time that it was their patriotic duty to enter the workforce. Most notably, interestingly, and I mention this only because one of my favorite movies is set in this time period, almost all of the major league baseball players and possibly other sports, I don't know as much about that. I only know what I do from the movie, but all of the male major league baseball players were drafted into the war, and that was when they actually started the first All-American Professional Women's Baseball League. So that was a really, really big deal. And I love them. The movie is called League of Their Own if you're not, for some reason, aware of it. It is a little bit older now, but I love it. If you've ever heard the phrase, "there's no crying in baseball," that's where it comes from. It's from that movie. It's got Tom Hanks, Gina Davis, and some other great actors in it. So if you've never seen it, please go check it out. It's so good. So the other thing that was happening because of World War II was there was a lot of rationing going on. They were rationing things like sugar, gas, butter, canned milk, meat, coffee, cars, etc., etc. There were so many things that were being rationed, even as simple as, and I don't know if I wrote it down on here, but even as simple as fabric. There was a lot of fabric that was rationed, and as a result, hemlines became shorter. Not for the sake of sex appeal, but for the sake of being frugal with the materials that the manufacturers were purchasing to create their product. And the thought process here was that all of what was being saved or using less of was actually helping to divert necessary funds and resources to the war effort. And of course, the other reason why the rationing happened too is there were also some breakdowns in sort of trade routes for how a lot of goods were acquired. That meant that there was actually a lot of things that they couldn't get. Not that they didn't have it or have access, but that there was, it was not making it to its intended destination at all, which is a really big deal. So if you have, I'm trying to think, probably great-grandparents at this point in time would really have lived through that and have a memory of it. So if you have any great-grandparents that are alive, they probably were there. They probably experienced it. They could probably tell you what it was like to sit in ration lines for sugar, for milk, for gas, because it was a really big deal. And I know a lot of people had some really big memories about it. And then, of course, after the war, thank goodness, there was a huge economic boom, much like there was after the pandemic. So right after, like, I think it was like 1919, there was a big, it was like the Spanish flu or the something of 19 whatever. I talked about it in my Roaring 20s video, and it's flown out of my brain since then. However, point being that following that, like everyone was quarantining and isolating, much like we are now, there was a big economic boom because people hadn't been working. So the same thing happened after the war as well. So once the men came home, came back to work, and some of the women, although many did not, went back to the kitchen, so to speak, things kind of exploded in a good way, economically speaking. So other than that, now I want to talk a little bit about some of the legal, so to speak, events that happened in that decade that kind of relate to witchcraft and paganism and the occult in general. I talk about it a little bit more in my blog. No, maybe I don't talk about my blog this week. I think I didn't go into a whole lot because it was a whole other it's a whole other ball of wax, and I didn't really want to jump into it because it's a huge topic. But there was a lot of debate over whether or not Adolf Hitler himself dabbled in the occult, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests that he did, and there are, of course, some other academics that say that he absolutely did not. Depends on who you talk to, but there's a big movement of people that have a very strong belief, and I've done a lot of research into the idea that he was indeed an occultist. But I digress. Some other much more important things that kind of happened in the 1940s to do with witchcraft and paganism specifically is that the kind of vestiges of the Witchcraft Act of 1735, which was in England actually, not America, were kind of playing out at that point in history. Let's see, did I write down? I didn't write down, of course. But in the 1940s at some point, because I forgot to write down a specific year, there was a woman named Helen Duncan. She was actually like a psychic medium. Now to clarify real quick before I continue, in a lot of the law, fortune telling and psychics and palm readers and tarot readers and what have you are kind of lumped into witchcraft frequently when it comes to legalese and law making. So when I talk about one in reference to legal events, it's kind of talking about the other in great part. So Helen Duncan, a medium, she was one of the last people tried under the Witchcraft Act of 1735, following a seance in which she predicted a naval boat disaster that had to do with a leak that was in the boat. And it was really, because she was right, she scared a lot of people, basically. A lot of superstitious folk that were like, oh man, this lady must really have it. What are we going to do? She can see stuff. And they were legitimately afraid that she was going to be able to see and then subsequently leak information about D-Day. Or D-Day secrets. So they actually, in order to try to stop her from potentially spreading that information, they decided to try her under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. She was actually imprisoned for 9 months as a result of that before she was finally released. And I don't believe she was actually charged. I think she was just accused, but still relevant. And then the last person that was convicted under the Witchcraft Acts of 1735 in England was a woman named Jane Rebecca York of Forest Gate in East London. I know, that's a very specific location. And on the 26th of September 1944, at the Central Criminal Court in York, she was convicted of 7 counts of pretending to cause the spirits of deceased persons to be present, and I imagine she was also a psychic medium doing seances, and again scared people, and people got a little too in their heads about it and decided that they wanted to make her life difficult as a result because she had a gift. So those are some of the last 2 folks that were actually affected by that specific act. I do believe that it was eventually repealed, but not until the following decade, which is why I don't talk about it here. So when we go into the 1950s, we'll talk more about that Witchcraft Act of 1735 and how it was eventually abolished, or whatever the right terminology is. So some other notable figures that were, really a big deal in the 1940s was Deon Fortune. My blog this week was entirely about Deon Fortune. I don't know about you, if you've done a lot of reading, about witchcraft and paganism and the occult. You've probably come across her name before. I know I had, but I knew very, very little about her. So this blog was really an opportunity for me and you to kind of learn a little bit more about her and why she is frequently thought of as one of the mothers of modern witchcraft and, I don't want to say paganism, but certainly witchcraft and magic and the occult, even as we sort of practice it in the modern day. She went several, you can learn more in my blog, which you can find linked from my bio if you're on Instagram. And of course, if you're on Facebook, you can find it at hedgecraftheirlooms.com/blog. No dashes or crazy characters you need to know about at all. Just the way it sounded when I said it. But some of her kind of like big contributions to magic and to ritual as we kind of practice it today, she espoused the concept for ritual composition, the way that we put rituals together today, and also the use of divine opposites. So it's a really big deal in a lot of systems to have, a god and a goddess, the male and the feminine, the two opposites, so to speak. I know I hate to put gender on it because of the way we think about it in the modern day, but the idea of how opposites kind of go together in order to create. And that can be lots of different types of opposites. It can be dark, it can be light, it can be male, it can be female, it can be lots of different things. But that is one of the things that she espoused that became absorbed into the mythos and belief system and the practice of magic and witchcraft as we see it today. As far as the modern Wicca and witchcraft are concerned, Gerald Gardner was sort of the first person. He was sort of like one of the fathers of modern Wicca and modern witchcraft. A lot of us have heard of him also, and I will talk about him more, I believe, in the 1960s. I have it written down somewhere, I can't remember. This in the 1940s is when we first hear about him, because there is a story about how him and a coven of, I want to say they're like New Forest or something, I can't remember where they were from, but New Forest Coven or something, witches in Britain, got together in order to perform several rituals, I believe, to prevent Hitler from invading England. And they called it, this happened in 1941, and they called it Operation Cone of Power, which is kind of fun. You can Google that, Operation Cone of Power. Eventually, the story kind of goes on that Hitler never did invade Britain. No one could say for certain whether or not it was because of the rituals that they were doing, or if it was other extenuating circumstances, or a little bit of both, or I'm inclined to think both, because what's the difference between them, really? There isn't any. So that's kind of when Gerald Gardner, you first start hearing about him, historically speaking. And I do know that in her life, too, that Deon Fortune, going backward just a little bit, also interacted to some length with Aleister Crowley, but she really ended up passing away before they really got the chance to work together on any projects. One of the things that she had really dreamed about doing was creating a unifying organization for all of the occultists in Europe, I believe, or maybe even just in England, I can't remember which. And she ended up passing away before she got that far, but that would have been a cool thing, hypothetically speaking. But then moving on to a much lighter subject, talking a little bit more about the style and the decor that was really popular in the 1940s. So one of the big styles that came out of the 1940s is one called Hollywood Regency, which ended up persisting into the 1960s, but it sort of began in the 1940s. So what kind of characterized Hollywood Regency was a lot of neoclassical elements. So you're getting a lot of things that have to do with mythology and very sort of Grecian design and like columns and that sort of thing. The Greek key type of stuff you'll see in that too. And it was basically characterized by the bold use of color and contrast, often with metallic and glass accents meant to signify both opulence and comfort. And I'm ashamed to admit that I remember writing that down and thinking to myself, I have the perfect piece to demonstrate that. But if you go into my feed, in my last drop that I did for St. Patrick's Day, I uploaded a glass I call it a chalice. It's a wine glass, basically, or a goblet, and it's glass, and it has a gold around the rim, and it has a Greek key design in it. And if you're not familiar with a Greek key, it's sort of this very geometrical square design, but it's a continuous line all the way through. Once you see it, you'd be like, oh, I know what that is. I've seen that a million times before. But you can see it in that piece if you want to go find it after and go see what I'm talking about. And interestingly, that piece is currently on sale in my Etsy shop, 15% off, so you can go check that out. But getting back to this, other things that were really popular design elements, especially in home decor, you were seeing a lot of knotty pine. Main reason being that pine is a very inexpensive wood that's used for building. And again, we were talking about the war, and people were sort of short on money, and there wasn't a lot available for spending. Linoleum became really big. Like, people were using linoleum for like everything, floors, countertops, ceilings. It was everywhere. It was kind of insane, actually. And another really, and plywood. Plywood, which is one of my least favorite things. But anyway, so they do plywood like linoleum over it or crazy things like that. The other thing that was really popular in the 1940s was a lot of really, really pervasive, scallop sorts of edging on things in design. If you're in my VIP list, and you got the email for today, if you look at the header that I put in that email, it's actually, and you can also find it on Google, the whole version too, but it's actually a picture of a 1940s kitchen that, again, had linoleum on the floor, linoleum on the countertop, linoleum on the ceiling, and it had these big scalloped, awnings almost over the window treatments, over the kitchen sink, and it was a very period. That's kind of why I used it, because it seemed very characteristic of 1940s home decor. But yeah, so that's what I have for you guys for about the 1940s. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad you guys sat with it with me. I hope that you enjoyed it. Have you guys seen A League of Their Own? Because again, one of my favorite movies. I feel like, my mom loved it when I was a kid, which is how I learned to love it, because she used to watch it a lot. But I feel like not everybody, of course, has a mom that was obsessed with that movie. So have you seen it before? I would love to hear if it's a lot more popular than I think. But anyway, that said, now that we've come through this, I'm going to do a real quick sign off, because usually this Instagram video I usually will upload to YouTube after. So if you're here and you're watching on YouTube, I just want to thank you so much for joining me for part of my 20th century witchcraft journey through the 1940s. I really love this series. Obviously next will be the 1950s, but for now, I'm really glad that you joined me, and I hope that I see you again in the next installment. So take care and blessed be.